Okay.
Okay, Paula and Sebastian, over to you.
We are both interested in the relationship between different species, like symbiosis and that kind of stuff. So we were wondering if there could be some type of complex communication between individuals of different species, not only between an interspecific communication, but interspecific.
Yeah, so interspecific communication is fascinating. I mean, and it ranges from bees and their pollinators, so or plants and their pollinators. So plants are communicating to their pollinators a lot of potential information about their suitability for pollination, about their about trying to attract them and lure them in. That's not acoustic communication. It's either visual or, in some cases, olfactory communication. There are whole communication networks of species that warn each other and listen to other species in terms of alarm calls. Rob McGrath at Australian National University is an authority on this and just published a really good paper in Current Zoology looking at how animals learn to respond, and really demonstrated that animals learn to respond to other individuals, which has always been thought to be a mechanism, and he demonstrated it very convincingly. There's information. I mean, any wise animal is going to pay attention to anything that gives it information about something that is important for its survival or reproduction or foraging success or whatever. So in many cases, species compete for food resources, and we expect that those competing species may also pay attention to their competitors, and if they compete a lot, if they overlap a lot in their niches, maybe they'll respond very strongly to their competitors because they are a threat to their own individual fitness. I think that once you begin thinking about interspecific communication, it gets really, really interesting because you really want to know who's listening to whom and how important are these relationships. And I say listen in a very anthropocentric sort of way of, I'm listening for these sorts of things, but it could be visual, it could be olfactory as well. So, when you begin taking apart webs of relationships, at some point systems are going to crap out and crash. So we can look at pollination networks, we can look at communication networks. How important are they? How resilient are these systems? But I think it's a real full employment scheme, and interesting both biologically and also in terms of conservation and management to study interspecific communication. I mean, so for example, we know that when prey species hear or otherwise detect their predators, even if they're not there, they're going to make a whole suite of decisions that can lead to them not breeding or them not feeding their young. So if you broadcast, this was a paper in Science a couple of years ago by Liana Zinet and Mike Clinchy, if you broadcast the sound of predators to nesting birds, just the sound of predators, not physical experience with predators, just the sound of predators can cause them to have reduced reproductive success. So fear also is something that is transmitted interspecifically and can be really important in some situations.
We're conducting quite a lot of research in collaboration with a range of colleagues in the States, looking at how communication maintains highly mutualistic associations. In this instance, between Lycaena butterfly caterpillars and their attendant ants. And in fact, some of the early research on that was conducted at the Rocky Mountain Biological Labs, where Dan's working at the moment. But this could be also true for any kind of interspecific mutualisms involving fish. The classic, of course, vertebrate system would be the honey badger and I think it's the indicator bird. I think is where these birds provide cues to badgers to find where there's large amounts of honey that the badgers then open up the nest, and the birds are able to feed on some of the food as well. So particularly in mutualisms, there has to be a range of communication that takes place. and because it's between individuals from two different species, the underlying mechanisms of it, I think, are particularly interesting. How selection has favoured that kind of communication is particularly fascinating.
And cleaner wrasse symbioses with their cleaner fish, really fascinating. And you know, is it true that if you're going to be a cheater fish, if you're going to take a bite out of, if you're a wrasse that's going to take a bite out of the fish, and you're not really a cleaner wrasse but you're a cheater, do you try to sell yourself as being the best cleaner out there? So even understanding where mutualisms may go awry, and you may have one individual becoming more parasitic. Again, here too, interspecific communication, but it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah. Danny, we missed your. Are you there? Your question on genetics, and I think it's actually a really useful question to discuss. So, could you just ask it again? And Dan, could I ask you to provide perhaps a slightly abbreviated answer, because I'm conscious of the time.
I've got about 5 more minutes because we've got to do some lab work here, and it's going to be loud.
Yeah. So Danny, please ask your question about genetics again, and then I think this will probably be the last question we've got time for.
Okay, my question was to Dan to talk a little about how genetics can help in the animal behavior studies.
So, I mean, I think that there are different ways of thinking about that question. I'm not a geneticist, but I've been involved in a number of quantitative genetic studies that are really trying to understand how plastic are individuals, how plastic is our population. So we can, because we know the genealogies of our marmots, because we know their mothers and fathers, we can begin to ask and understand how much variation in what we're seeing is explained by heritability. How much of this variation is heritable? How much of this variation is explained by genetics? Similarly, we can also ask how much of it is explained by a variety of environmental factors. So I think teasing apart and decomposing variation in traits and trying to identify and isolate genetic components using quantitative genetic techniques, maternal components, paternal components, environmental components, maternal environmental components, is a really interesting thing to do and an important thing to do in a world where we have climate change and there are limits on plasticity. We're also getting into some gene expression studies where we're trying to understand really costs and benefits of social behavior and trying to understand how animals prepare themselves for environmentally major life stages, dispersing, hibernation, etc. And we also are in the process of putting together a marmot genome to ask comparatively across marmot species, how can we look for evidence of selection for the lifestyles that marmots have, which include some live at very high elevations, but also others, I mean, the species all hibernate. They hibernate for different amounts of time. So we have a whole suite of genetic questions we're asking and genomic questions we're asking. But to me, what I'm really interested in are these behavioral genetic questions that one uses quantitative genetics to begin to understand sources of variation at your population level. Because I think that there are important implications for understanding the limits of plasticity, which is, in a warming world, is a real issue.
Terrific. I'm going to wrap this up now. So I really want to thank Dan for spending his very valuable time. I know how valuable time is when you're conducting field work. So Dan, thank you so much for providing us with really fun, interesting, and I think very wise commentary about animal behavior generally. And thanks also to all of the people who've joined in the Hangout for asking questions and being a little bit patient when technology didn't quite go our way. And to everybody else who's listening to this post-production or post-live, I hope you've all enjoyed doing animal behavior, and many thanks for joining our course. So thank you, and we'll conclude this particular Hangout.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.